introduction, those of you that are new to our coffee morning talks, we have quarterly talks, and these Coffee with the Curator talks are really informal talks, just to really let people know a bit more about the Society's collection. We have an amazing collection based at Kelmscott House in Hammersmith, where the William Morris Society's headquarters are. And during lockdown, we thought it'd be a nice idea to really raise awareness by taking usually one example, one item from the collection, which ranges from all sorts of items, from wallpapers and textiles to archive material and furniture from Morris and Company, and then telling a story about that one item. So today it's hard to tell my favourite item, but this is one of my favourite designs in the Society's collection. The design for the ceiling decoration of the drawing room at number 1 Holland Park in London, home of the Ionides family. So we'll make a start now. I can just move my first slide on, and there should be time at the end for questions. So I think this should be around half an hour long, or maybe just slightly over half an hour, because there's quite a lot to talk about in this amazing house we're going to look at this morning. So 1 Holland Park was first the London home of the wealthy Greek merchant Alexander Constantine Ionides, who we can see on the left-hand side of this painting by G.F. Watts. He was born in Constantinople in 1810 and moved to London in 1834. And here he is pictured with his wife and his family. He became Greek consul general between 1854 and 1866, when he met members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, including Rossetti and Burne-Jones. And it's during this time that Alexander bought his impressive residence at Holland Park for £4,500 in 1864. And when Alexander retired and moved to Hastings in 1875, the house became the home of his youngest son, Alexander, whose nickname was Aleko. And here he is as the baby, seated in his mother's lap. Aleko worked for the family merchant banking firm, but prior to this had spent a period of time in Paris with a group of artist friends. And like his father, Aleko was to become a great patron of the arts, as we'll soon discover. The Holland Park estate attracted a number of key personalities. Aleko's sister, Aglaia, who was to become Aglaia Coronio, is seen here with her arms around her mother. And she was to become great friends and a confidant of William Morris, and she lived next door to her brother Aleko. Other neighbours at the Holland Park estate included Edward Burne-Jones, G.F. Watts and Lord Leighton. Aleko and 1 Holland Park were really at the centre of the artistic and literary elites of the day. And I'll also mention that Aleko's eldest brother, Constantine Alexander, seen here in traditional Greek dress standing in this painting on the right, would go on to bequeath his magnificent art collection to the V&A. So we'll move on to the house. The exterior of 1 Holland Park received rather negative comments. When the architect Philip Webb was commissioned to make improvements to the property, he described it as hopeless, saying that it was like a feather bed, shapeless, and when you pushed it in one direction, it stuck out in another. Although he did decide to take on responsibility for major alterations to the fabric of the building, work that would occupy him for nearly a decade, between 1879 and 1888. And the house was to become one of his most important London commissions. However, it's the incredible interior of 1 Holland Park that we'll be looking at this morning. The extensive decoration and furnishing of 1 Holland Park became one of the grandest private commissions of the 1880s. Aleko began discussions with William Morris in 1879, and then between March 1880 and October 1888, Morris and Company undertook a considerable interior scheme, along with other leading figures of the arts and crafts movement. Morris and Company decorated the major rooms of this stunning London residence, undertaking everything from paper hanging, painting, supplying wood panelling, fitting carpets and curtains and wall hangings, to stuffing and upholstering chairs. This resulted in the Aleko Ionides family home becoming the subject of articles and photographic reports, and it's no surprise that the property was known as a showcase of the decorative arts. Despite the loss of the house, it was demolished sadly in the 1950s. There is a unique and fascinating record of this substantial Morrison Company commission in the form of a considerable archive of invoices and bills from the company to its clients, now held at the V&A. And there is also an incredible photograph album by Harry Bedford Lemire, one of the foremost photographers of the day. This beautifully atmospheric collection of 19 photographs of the exterior and interior are also held at the V&A, giving a unique insight into this extravagantly furnished home. The presentation album shows the Morrison Company scheme completed in 1888, although the album was dated 10 years later, and it's inscribed as architectural photographers to Her Majesty the Queen. The firm specialised in architectural photography, producing thousands of images of some of the most luxurious and artistic houses, stately homes and castles of the age. As with One Holland Park, many of these residences are now lost, and so the Bedford Lemire photographs provide an invaluable insight into British interior decoration of the late 19th century. And it's these photographs that we'll be concentrating on in our talk this morning, although I must apologise that these are my photographs of the photograph album, so they're not all as good as they actually are in the actual album at the V&A, but I've done my best with my camera when I was in the archive. And so we'll begin by looking in detail at the dining room, which has Philip Webb's sideboard and fireplace of Purbeck marble with antique Persian tiles of hunting scenes, as well as Philip Webb's panelling. The glorious silver gesso frieze decoration is by Walter Crane, and it's widely considered to be the masterpiece of this room. It takes as its subject the fox and crane, and Walter Crane described it as follows. The room already had a fine Spanish stamped leather on the walls and some charming woodwork designed by Webb. I designed a coppered ceiling in relief, taking the vine as the ornamental motif, and thinking of Omar Khayyam, I placed an inverted cyclex to serve as a boss at each truncation of the panel moulding. The frieze illustrated Aesop's fables in a series of panels, each diverted by vertical pilasters panelled with arabesque. The ceiling and frieze were, when fixed, covered with silver leaf and then tinted with various lacquers. Afterwards, the small designs worked in gesso in low relief in situ were added as fillings in Webb's panelling at the end of the room and in the fireplace. A long panel above the latter being decorated with a design also in gesso, emphasising the motif of the vine by a symbolic group framed by the inscriptions from the quatrains of Omar Khayyam. Crane himself described gesso as an art form in between sculpture and painting. And although we cannot tell the colours of the room, it must have been truly vibrant. Contemporary descriptions describe the vine of life on the ceiling as being painted in gold on a blue ground, and the Spanish leather on the walls embossed with a pattern in gold, bronze green, and a little dark red on a sea green ground. Most of the walls were covered with silver leaf and tinted with lacquers in different colours, including green, silver, and crimson. Crane also designed bell pulls, light fittings, and door plates in lacquered gesso and low relief designs for Webb's wood panelling. And it's certainly true that not a square inch was free from decoration. Whistler's self-portrait hung in the dining room, and we can see it in situ on the left-hand side of the fireplace in this picture here. There was also a mahogany Morrison Company dining table inlaid with ebony, with dining chairs upholstered in red velvet to match the Morrison Company curtains. The effect was described by contemporary visitors as gorgeous yet restrained. Gleason White in the Studio magazine wrote that it would be very hard to find another instance of equally elaborate decoration that was so cunningly kept within the proper restraint. The result is the reverse of gaudy and as harmonious as a fine piece of ancient metal with a patina of age upon it. Louis Day agreed with these sentiments, writing in the Art Journal, and described the decoration as a daring experiment justified by complete success. Philip Webb created a staircase extension which contained ceiling tiles by William de Morgan, and the oak staircase had a patent Axminster carpet by Morris, said to be of a pleasant harmony in pale greyish green and cinnamon. And the same design was used in the billiard room and on landings. The staircase also contained Aleco's collection of bronze sculptures at either side beneath the handrail. The ceiling was painted by Morris and Company and was described as being decorated with small arabesques in gold and other colours. At the top of the stairs is a painting of the Ionides family by G.F. Watts. Aleco's father had provided Watts with his very first commission, and Watts would go on to paint 5 generations of the family. Moving on to the drawing room. A lesser aspect of the Holland Park scheme is the delightful Morris and Company ceiling design for the drawing room, which featured prominently in the Morris and Company catalogue and interior design seen here. And this is the page from that catalogue which describes the decoration of the room and this lovely image of it. We can see the Morris and Company ceiling design, just the corner of it. Unfortunately, that's all we get to see in the Bedford linear photograph that's been used in the Morris and Company catalogue, just that little corner there. And here's a close-up of it. Again, it's difficult to see, but this is the design that we have in the Society's collection. The decoration of that drawing room ceiling was estimated to cost around £160. And the William Morris Society is extremely fortunate to have the original pencil and watercolour for this ceiling from 1880 in its collection, providing a unique insight into the colouring and feel of the interior now that the house is no longer extant, as we only have black and white photographs to judge it by. This beautiful repeating design in greens, pinks, blues and oranges includes a delightful selection of flowers. And I thought it'd be interesting to research what those flowers might be. And these are our best suggestions, as the flowers are quite stylized. So the pink 5-petal flower that we see quite frequently in the design on the left here could be either a dianthus, seen at the bottom there, or a wild dog rose, also seen at the bottom. Or another suggestion is that the climbing plant is a jasmine. So the third idea for that on the far right bottom of our slide here is the jasmine plant. That also has 5 petals, and there are pink as well as white varieties, and it has the right shaped leaf for this climbing plant that we see featured in the design. And we also know that Morris featured jasmine in many of his patterns, including dedicated a whole wallpaper design to jasmine. And then moving on to that pink flower at the very top of our design on the left there, the very top right hand corner. It could be a chrysanthemum seen on the right middle there, which makes quite a nice connection because there are lots of varieties of chrysanthemum around, and also Morris and Company had the gold chrysanthemum wallpaper decorated at One Holland Park, so that makes a nice link. Or it could be a dahlia, which is seen at the top right. And then moving on to the orange blooms in the design on the left there. Initially, I thought there might be tulips, but another suggestion has been the tiger lily that we have represented in the very centre of our slide. Although, because it does seem to be more accurate to the shape of the petals in the flower, although we do know that Morris preferred traditional English plants in his designs, so we're a bit unsure. But we thought it'd be fun to just have an idea of trying to pick apart the design and see what flowers they may be. And we're very interested to know if our viewers have any suggestions, different ideas. So looking back at the drawing room, there was the Morris & Company flower garden, woven silk stretched on the walls, as well as the curtains and embroidered valances. The completed decorative scheme in the drawing room would have looked extremely rich and vibrant, with a colour scheme said to have been chosen to suggest the beauties of inlaid metal. Much of the work was closely supervised by William Morris himself, which we know was usual for major commissions at this time in the company's history. And we know from records that Morris made at least 11 journeys to Holland Park, as shown in his 1880 claim for expenses. There was a specially designed Holland Park Hammersmith carpet costing £113 on the floor. And here we have an example here. Designed by William Morris and woven at Merton Abbey in 1883, this hand-knotted woven carpet, and that was one of 4 Hammersmith carpets in the house. It was described by Linda Parry, the textile expert, as Morris's most complex carpet design, showing traces of all his greatest influences: medievalism, floral realism, and Eastern precision. It was produced at least 6 times, mostly in the same colouring we have in this example of the red border with the indigo blue field. The 1898 Studio magazine featured an article by Gleason White on One Holland Park, which described the carpet's robust, generous curves blossoming into flower-like patterns with a sense of space. It shows a more traditional quarter design based around the central medallion, and it's more formal than Morris's previous examples. Linda Parry has argued that this change in style featured in the Holland Park carpet really marks a turning point in Morris's development, which coincided with his increasing interest in historic carpets and textiles in general. In the same year he designed the Holland Park carpet, Morris joined the South Kensington Museum, now the V&A, as an advisor on their acquisition board, and many of their historic textiles were thereafter bought on Morris's expert advice. The drawing room also has this magnificent grand piano commissioned by Alecko for his home. It was manufactured by John Broadwood and Sons in 1845, and this oak piano stained green was designed by Edward Burne-Jones and decorated by Kate Faulkner. Kate Faulkner was a designer with Morris & Company and created several wallpapers, as well as painting tiles and gesso decoration for the firm. She decorated the piano with silver and gold gesso in a glorious swirling leaf design. 10 craftsmen were involved in making the case and movement, and the contemporary journal, The Builder, said that it considered the spectacular decoration rather overdone. It would certainly require the whole apartment to be designed up to it. And it was certainly the case that the setting at Holland Park lived up to the dramatic decoration on this amazing piano. It's now on display at the V&A, donated by the Ioannidis family. Paintings on the wall were mostly by Burne-Jones, and we can see Pan and Psyche here on the right-hand side of the curtain. And there was also Spring and March Marigold. Burne-Jones was a frequent visitor to the house, and it was at Holland Park that he met Maria Zambarco, the niece of Alexander Ioannidis, with whom he had a now notorious affair. Other guests at the house included Edward Poynter, Robert Browning, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and George de Maurier. And it was the latter who immortalised Alecko as the Greek in his novel Trilby. And it was also George de Maurier who described One Holland Park as stunning. So moving on now to the antiquities room. And we can see here the view from that room into the drawing room that we've just looked at. So the antiquities room had a gold foil wallpaper with the Morris & Company chrysanthemum pattern embossed in silver, overlaid with washes of transparent lacquer, which must have given a brilliance to the walls we can only imagine. The cream-coloured ceiling was painted by Morris & Company in silver and gold, and the company also supplied new panelling, cupboards, and glass cases, a fireplace and grate, and glazed the windows with leaded glass. The hangings were green and blue, and the chairs were upholstered in green Utrecht velvet, again with flower garden silk and wool damask on the portiere over the opening between the two rooms, and as were the curtains and balances, and there was also oak silk damask curtains. A version of the Morrison Company Carbrook carpet was specially made for the Antiquities room in 1883 at the cost of £82, and this is also now in the V&A. This stunning example seen here in the view from the Antiquities room into the drawing room has large traditional palmettes and medallions, and it was bequeathed to the V&A by Aglio Ionides. More pre-Raphaelite paintings on display as well here, and there was a Morrison Company painted ceiling again. And also prominently displayed in the Antiquities room were the Ionides collection of Tanagra figures on Walter Crane's magnificent mantelpiece. Tanagra statues were terracotta grave goods, and it was Alecco who began a fashion for collecting them. The majority of this wonderful and large collection of terracottas was sold at Christie's in London in 1902. And this group of Greek terracotta fragmentary figures date from the late 4th to 1st century BC and include a torso of Aphrodite, Eros in flight, 7 draped torsos, a bust of a young boy with arms around the dog, 15 mainly female heads, a group of 10 limbs, and a cornucopia laden with fruit. Many of Alexander's and Alecco's treasures were acquired through the help of Murray Marks, an expert and importer of Oriental pieces. Whistler was a regular visitor to the house and was commissioned by several members of the Ionides family, and it was Whistler who went on to make a collection of photographs of these statues. Walter Crane designed a special display for them that we can see here in the centre, of black marble with red and yellow sienna marble columns, described as a sort of temple-like cabinet placed in the position of an overmantel of ebony with gilded recesses to hold the figures. These ancient statues range from 5 centimetres to 10 centimetres high and must have looked remarkable against Crane's fantastic setting. And we can see a Morrison Company embroidered fire screen also in the picture here, and the tiled fireplace. The drawing room and antiquities together were both decorated in 1883 and cost over £1,300. Moving on to the billiard room, Whistler's friendly architect Thomas Jekyll designed a ground floor extension which included the impressive billiard room, which had a Morrison Company carpet, but also invoked the fashion for Japanese design. The ceilings and walls were framed in oak, and the dado and the ceiling were panelled with red lacquered Japanese trays. To further add to the Japanese look, Japanese paintings on silk covered the walls, and the high mantel was of red lacquer with tiles of red lustre installed around the fireplace. And then we'll move on to the study. The most impressive Morrison Company item in the study was the forest tapestry, bought by Alecco to hang in this room, which had green walls alongside, and you just see it above the door here in the corner of the room. There's an acanthus leaf panel which hung above that door there. So looking in detail at the tapestry on the right though, the forest tapestry, the overall design was by Morris, with animals by Philip Webb, and foreground foliage by John Henry Durrell. This tapestry featured Morris's signature glorious scrolling acanthus leaves, interspersed with Webb's peacock, hare, lion, fox, and raven. And the inscription reads, "The beasts that be in woodland waste, now sit and see, not ride nor haste." The V&A purchased this tapestry from the Ionides family in 1926 for £500. We can also see Thomas Jekyll's fireplace, and Morrison Company supplied parquet flooring to the room. The study also had a little flower Hammersmith carpet on the central floor and a little tree, smaller Hammersmith rug in the bay in shades of reds and blues. The Jekyll fireplace had an overmantel of red Japanese lacquer to house Alecco's collection of rare red and white vases. And Louis Day in the Studio magazine wrote that this was a room of contradictions and contrasts, saying, "A dish of Japanese dragons in raised lacquer is hung as a pendant to one of Spanish lustre, and a Greco-Roman elephant in bronze is found in close proximity to one in brass, patterned all over in beasts and ornaments in a manner peculiar to Persian art." And hopefully you can just about see from my photograph of the photograph, the wallpaper. This is Morrison Company's Vine wallpaper, but it's not the usual version. Again, to match the glorious gold and lacquer papers in the house, we can see it here. So the Holland Park version of Vine is extraordinarily printed using green and black paint on gold foil, which was then embossed to create a crinkled effect in imitation of leather, then backed with a thick paper, making the wallpaper very expensive. And this is an example of that wallpaper from the Society's own collection. And when researching for this talk, I made quite a nice, exciting discovery of a previously unknown Hammersmith rug made for the house, one that's almost identical to one in the William Morris Society's collection, which is a lovely link. This Hammersmith rug is mentioned in a Philip Webb letter to Aleppo in July 1888 and was invoiced in October of that year. The rug remained in the Ionides family until a recent sale. So we just compare the Holland Park carpet here with this one in the William Morris Society's collection. You can see how similar they are. Hammersmith rugs and carpets were hand knotted, beginning in the coach house of Kelmscott House, before the carpet looms were moved to Merton Abbey in 1881. So our example was produced around 1880 when these carpets were still manufactured in the coach house at Kelmscott House. And so it displays the very early Hammersmith mark in the bottom corner here with a letter M on the side to signify it was produced at Kelmscott House with a hammer for Hammersmith. The Ionides version doesn't have the hammer motif as it was woven at Merton Abbey, even though it's still called a Hammersmith carpet. So it's fascinating to see the two carpets side by side, the Holland Park version on the left and the Society's own version on the right. You can see they're almost identical in colouring, design, just the missing hammer there on the bottom. And then we move on to some of the last rooms in the house. Although contemporary photographs understandably highlighted the splendours of the main rooms of the house, we know that the servants' quarters and bedrooms were also decorated by Morrison Company with Axminster carpets and wallpapers. And other rooms showed Alecco's collection of Persian antiques and embroideries, including brassware, bronzes, earthenwares, and tiles. The furnishing and decoration of the house was of great importance to Morrison Company, bringing attention to the company and directly leading to further profitable commissions, including a commission from the Beale family, who also had a home in Holland Park and later commissioned Morrison Company to decorate their Philip Webb country home, Standon. The Studio magazine described Holland Park in this way: "It is one great charm of the whole house that it strikes one unmistakably as a place to live in. It is stored full of beautiful things, but they take their place and are not, as it were, on exhibition. It has none of the air of a museum. One is struck not so much by the richness of it all as by its beauty." Alecco died in 1888, and his widow sold the house in 1908 to the trustees of the Earl of Ilchester, the owners of nearby Holland House. And we can see here another room with the Daisy, Morrison Company Daisy wallpaper, along with Alecco's beautiful collection of Oriental art, as well as Morrison Company furnishings. But sadly, the contents of the house were sold, and the house began to fade into obscurity. Sadly, in the 1920s, the decorations, including the William Morris Society's glorious ceiling, were painted over. And tragedy struck further when the house suffered serious bomb damage during the Second World War. The house was sold to the London County Council in 1952 and demolished a year later. However, as we've discovered, several items from the house survived, and not all are in private ownership. A substantial number are now in V&A, including the Burne-Jones and Kate Faulkner piano, 2 of the Hammersmith carpets, the archive from Morrison Company with the bills and invoices, and the fabulous Bedford Lemire photograph album that this talk has been based around. And of course, the Society has the only known remaining design for any of the painted ceilings, this wonderful drawing room ceiling, offering a rare glimpse of this now lost but highly significant interior, one of the most comprehensive and stunning decorative schemes of Morrison Company. Thank you very much for listening. And if anybody has any questions or comments, please do put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. And just to give people a little bit of time, if anybody does want to write any comments, I'll just mention a couple of things that are happening at the Society. Our next talk is a full hour-long lecture in our usual lecture series. That's next week on the 25th of April at 6 p.m. and that's an online talk about Ruskin and textiles. So that should be a fascinating lecture. I'm really looking forward to that. And also, those of you that are able to visit Kelmscott House in Hammersmith, do please come along if you can, because we've got an absolutely beautiful new exhibition exploring the work of John Henry Durrell, who started off as Morris's apprentice and later became artistic director of the firm. He's been sort of undervalued, really, and this is the first solo exhibition of his work. So we're really, really excited to present that exhibition. So I do hope some of you are able to come and see that. And I think we've just had a comment in from one of our viewers to say it's a little bit busy for their taste. I see that. I do understand, and I do wonder what Morris himself thought. Although he just supervised the early part of the scheme, I wonder what he felt as it grew more and more cluttered with a collection of antiquities and the enormous number of furnishings. It's quite different from Morris's sort of usual simple and elegant interiors. Oh, and Carolyn's actually mentioned that she's seen one of the items. I'm just trying to get that back. A lovely picture of the fisherman and boat in the Watts Gallery recently. So great to see it's originally hung in the study. Oh, that's great that you've seen that. Thanks for your comments, Carolyn. Also, Venetia's actually mentioned about the interior being lost. Yes, unfortunately was actually demolished. So what happened was the ceilings, the painted ceilings were all painted over. I think Morrison Company's work became quite unfashionable, and the contents were unfortunately sold and being dispersed. Luckily, several items are now in the V&A. We have the ceiling design in our collection. And then unfortunately the house itself, the actual property was demolished in 1953. So you can't actually go and see the house anymore. The photographs were actually presented to the V&A. So that album was made on completion of the interior design scheme. It was completed in 1888, and those photographs were taken to mark the completion of the Morrison Company scheme then. And then 10 years later, this really amazing album was created by the Bedford Lemire Photographic Company and presented to the V&A. So that photograph album, is now at the V&A. So a lot of the photographs that I showed in the talk are my sort of snaps of that album with permission from the V&A archivist, because now actually see it in the art library there at the V&A. So we're really lucky that we do have these photographs of the house, as we just wouldn't have any idea of the amazingly extravagant interior that's now gone. So if we've got any more, I hope that answers that. Carolyn's also mentioned about the Daisy wallpaper. Yeah, it's lovely to see that in the room. There were several wallpapers. There was chrysanthemum, vine, daisy, and pink and poppy as well. So several Morrison Company wallpapers that we know of decorating this house, but most of them were in the really rich versions in gold with lacquer on it and like gold foil. Carolyn's really interestingly mentioned about a drawing in the RIBA for Manchester Art Museum, but exhibition for Morrison Company from a cottage for the lower middle class. So that was interesting. It wasn't just the the upper classes using it as well. Thanks so much for all your comments. It's great to have these comments and the interaction. And again, thanks ever so much for to everybody for your support and for listening to our talk. So our quarterly Coffee with the Curator talks will continue. So next one will be July. And so I do hope people can join us then. But please do look at our website for our future talks. As I mentioned, next week, Ruskin and textiles, and then we have regular lectures on an evening as well. So I do hope people can join us for more events at the Society. And thank you again for joining us, and I hope everybody has a lovely rest of their day. Thank you.